Okay, guys, I think this is going to be the last one. Page 129. Systematic deficiencies in BPD's practices contribute to constitutional violations, erode community trust, and inhibit effective policing. The constitutional violations described in our findings result in part from critical deficiencies in BPD systems to train, equip, supervise, and hold officers accountable, and to build relationships with the broader Baltimore community. First, BPD fails to adequately supervise its officers. This lack of supervision manifests itself in multiple ways, including a failure to guide officer activity through effective policies and training, a failure to collect and analyze reliable data to supervise officer enforcement activities, and the lack of a meaningful early intervention system to identify officers who may benefit from additional training or other guidance to ensure that they do not commit constitutional violations. Second, BPD lacks meaningful accountability systems to deter misconduct. BPD does not consistently classify, investigate, adjudicate, and document complaints of misconduct according to its own policies and accepted law enforcement standards. Indeed, we found that BPD personnel sometimes discourage complaints from being filed and frequently conduct little or no investigation, even of serious misconduct allegations. As a result, a culture resistant to accountability persists throughout much of BPD, and many officers are reluctant to report misconduct for fear that doing so is fruitless and may provoke retaliation. Third, BPD fails to have proper agreements in place to coordinate its activities with other agencies that are operating within its jurisdiction. Fourth, BPD fails to adequately support its officers through effective strategies for recruitment, retention, and staffing patterns, and does not provide them with appropriate technology and equipment. Fifth, BPD does not engage effectively with the community it polices. BPD's failure to use accepted community policing strategies and transparency mechanisms erodes the community trust that is central to productive law enforcement. The systematic deficiencies impair officer safety and effectiveness and lead to direct violations of the Constitution and federal law. BPD fails to adequately supervise its officers' enforcement activities. BPD does not provide adequate policy guidance and training to its officers. BPD's inadequate policies and training contribute to the department's pattern or practice of constitutional violations. Clear, comprehensive, and legally accurate policies and training are essential to the proper functioning of a police department. They provide crucial guidance for officers regarding what practical steps to take to remain in compliance with departmental rules and legal requirements, allow supervisors to properly monitor and instruct officers, and provide consistent guidelines for officer discipline. Here we find that certain BPD policies and trainings do not fulfill these functions. BPD officers Sorry about that. BPD officers thus lack sufficient guidance to ensure that their enforcement activities are effective, safe, and consistent with the constitutional rights of the people they serve. While BPD has made admirable efforts to upgrade its policies in 2015 and 2016, some outdated and contradictory policies remain in effect, diminishing the impact of the new policies and procedures. They go on to describe the deficient policies. As we described above in our findings, crucial deficiencies in BPD's policies contribute to officers violating the constitutional rights of Baltimore residents. For example, officers' frequent use of tasers to apply constitutionally excessive forces connected to the department's failure to have any policy governing the use of electronic control weapons until 2015. BPD similarly lacked any policy on baton use, also a frequent source of constitutional violations, until 2016. The department likewise lacked a fair and impartial policing policy until 2015, despite long-standing notice of concerns about its policing of the city's African American population. And policy deficiencies also contribute to officers' frequent illegal stops, searches, and arrests by misstating the law on the justification required to stop or frisk individuals suspected of criminal activity. Indeed, several BPD policies do not adequately capture the current state of the law, and others provide insufficient guidance to officers to allow them to align their conduct with constitutional requirements. Deficient training. Compounding the problems with policy developments, BPD relies on deficient training on a broad array of substantive policing functions. This contributes to the pattern or practice of violations of the Constitution and federal law that we observed. Officers have not been properly trained on numerous important topics, from the use of force and de-escalation to stops, searches, and arrests, to how to supervise and investigate misconduct. Absent effective training on how to properly conduct these actions, it is not surprising that BPD officers frequently violate federal law when interacting with the community. Our observations of training programs, review of internal documents, and conversations with BPD personnel revealed that training deficiencies within the department arise from foundational issues at BPD's overall approach to training. The department has failed to establish a robust training program and lacks the basic organizational capacities, infrastructure, and support required to effectively train police officers to respond to situations that arise in law enforcement encounters. Excuse me. Training has not been a top priority within BPD. Our investigation revealed that one of the fundamental causes of the breakdowns in training is the department's indifferent attitude towards its training program. Numerous members of BPD, from line officers to command staff to training personnel, conveyed to us that training is not a priority within the department. Indeed, BPD's former director of the Training Academy released a needs assessment in 2015 that highlighted an internal culture of placing training second, expectations for rush training, and outside pressure to condense training programs as threats to the current program. See Baltimore Police Department Training Academy Needs Assessment, July 2015. Unfortunately, after the training director sent the needs assessment to BPD's leadership, he did not receive a response for months. He also organized 3 different meetings with patrol commanders to begin making changes based on the needs assessment, but no commanders attended the meetings. What else is new? BPD lacks basic infrastructure to train its officers. The failure to invest in training infrastructure underscores BPD's failure to prioritize this crucial component of effective policing. BPD lacks adequate staff to train its officers efficiently. Its training facilities are outdated, ill-repaired, and often unable to accommodate modern training methods, and BPD lacks mechanisms to track officer attendance and performance to ensure that officers receive and understand the training they need to engage in safe, effective constitutional policing. The Training Academy is notably under-resourced. The program lost about 2/3 of its staff over the past 3 years. Training staff fell from approximately 60 in 2013 to 20 currently. During the course of our investigation, 30 classes had no primary instructor. Multiple training units, including the ones responsible for supervisor training for new sergeants and lieutenants, were entirely vacant with no personnel staffing them. We also found that student to instructor ratios during training classes was often extremely high, undermining effective communication of the material. The Fraternal Order of Police has also highlighted this concern, noting that class sizes for new recruits training have averaged 35 to 50 officers. Minimal staffing also poses difficulties for BPD instructors to attend outside courses to develop their training skills. BPD training facilities are in a similarly troubling state. During the course of our investigation, we were informed that BPD has only 17 computers available to train its nearly 4,000 personnel. The buildings themselves are in disrepair. Water cannot be consumed from the faucets, and the building often lacked workable air conditioning and heating. According to the Academy's recent needs assessment, the decrepit state of the Academy itself gives the impression of a lackadaisical and uncommitted attitude towards the necessities of training the modern police officer. Recruits, sworn personnel, visiting law enforcement experts, and civilians get the impression that they are party to a fly-by-night, poverty-stricken department when they find themselves in a crumbling, drafty building. Despite efforts to improve training, much work remains to fix the program. And that goes, That speaks for itself. BPD does not adequately supervise officers or collect and analyze data on their activities. Serious deficiencies in BPD's supervision of its enforcement activities, including thorough data collection and analysis, contribute to the department's failure to identify and correct unconstitutional policing. BPD does not effectively use data to oversee officer activity. BPD fails to collect and record important data on a broad range of police activities, and that when it does collect data, BPD does not use the data to manage and supervise officer activity. As discussed in Section 2A4, BPD's own internal audits and other indications demonstrate that officers fail to record any information on a large portion of the stops and searches conducted on Baltimore streets, contrary to BPD's own policies and procedures. When officers do record the existence of a stop, they do not consistently record important information connected to it. We found that officers likewise often fail to report using force against individuals, and as with stops and searches, even where force is reported, officers do not consistently document important supporting information, such as statements from witnesses and other officers on the scene. These omissions violate BPD's own policy requirements. The policies and procedures are also under-inclusive, however, and do not require information to be gathered that is essential to supervise officer activity effectively. Even when data is collected, BPD fails to store it in systems that are capable of effective tracking and analysis. Chief among the data analysis challenges is BPD's failure to use integrated systems to maintain information. Information technology officers with the department informed us that BPD uses 232 separate databases to store information, most of which cannot link to each other. Moreover, most files do not contain unique identifiers that allow supervisors to identify and review information about a single incident that may be stored in separate databases. For example, BPD uses different programs or databases to record stops, arrests, and incident reports. The different information captured on these activities is siloed. BPD systems do not allow a supervisor reviewing a record of an arrest or use of force that stem from a pedestrian stop to access the stop record that is maintained separately. BPD's failure to respond to its pattern of conducting unlawful arrests illustrates the consequences of segregating related data in unconnected systems. As explained above, Maryland maintains data on all arrests by BPD officers for which booking officers find no probable cause or otherwise result in prosecutors declining to bring charges. Many of these problematic arrests stem from stop searches and other incidents described in various BPD reports, yet the department lacks any mechanism to connect problematic arrests to information about the enforcement actions that precipitated them, because that information is maintained in separate programs or databases. BPD supervisors thus lack critical information to correct those constitutional violations. They also don't conduct pattern analysis of officers' activity. BPD does not use an adequate early intervention system. Related to BPD's failure to supervise its officers and collect data on their activities, the department lacks an adequate early intervention system, or EIS, to identify officers based on patterns of their enforcement activities, complaints, and other criteria. An effective early intervention system allows sergeants, lieutenants, and commanders to proactively supervise the officers under their command and to continually assess officers' risk of engagement in problematic behavior. EIS is a forward-looking tool that helps supervisors interrupt negative patterns before they manifest as conduct or unconstitutional activity. Likewise, early intervention systems help supervisors recognize positive patterns that should be encouraged. BPD's EIS does not achieve these goals. BPD fails to adequately support its officers. BPD fails to support its officers through effective strategies for recruitment, retention, and staffing patterns, and does not provide them with appropriate technology and equipment. The department must address a number of internal challenges, namely current and projected manpower shortages and outdated technology, facilities, equipment, and insufficient resources in order to ensure that officers are adequately supported. BPD districts are short-staffed, an issue that is further complicated by challenges the department is facing in retaining experienced officers and in recruiting qualified cadets. Additionally, the department's technology, equipment, and facilities are outdated, creating inefficiencies for officers and the department and negatively impacting the department's relationship with the community. The department also lacks critical resources to support officers such as psychological counseling for officers following a traumatic incident. Supervisors misclassify complaints and administratively close them without investigation. After intake of a complaint, BPD investigators frequently misclassify those complaints or administratively close them with little attempt to contact the complainant. First, BPD investigators often inappropriately categorize complaints as minor allegations that may be resolved at the command level without IID involvement. Appropriately categorizing a complaint is critical because it affects which internal affairs component will investigate, the level of the investigation undertaken, and the possible discipline imposed. BPD's policy on command discipline lists categories of cases that may be handled by the district, but this fails to provide guidance for officers and detectives about when cases should be referred to IID or who is responsible for making that decision. Instead, we were told that BPD officers and the IID investigators categorize complaints based on common sense. Moreover, we found that BPD does not use its internal affairs database to consistently review how complaints are categorized, and that is its only mechanism for doing so. This process vests considerable discretion in supervisors, and we found that supervisors frequently use this discretion to classify allegations of misconduct that result in minimal investigation. Indeed, we found that the department resolved the majority of the approximately 38,000 allegations made against BPD officers from 2010 through 2015 at the command level without referral to IID, resulting in significantly less investigation. Moreover, of these 38,000 allegations, 9,694 allegations were categorized as supervisor complaints, which according to BPD commanders requires no investigation at all. Accordingly, allegations handled as supervisor complaints virtually never result in discipline. We found that BPDs administratively closed 67% of supervisor complaints and sustained just 0.27% of them, or 1 out of every 370 allegations. Many complaints that were sent to command investigations or classified as supervisor complaints alleged serious misconduct, including allegations that officers committed criminal assault, theft, and domestic violence. In 2014, for example, although a complaint on intake alleged a sexual assault, the case was assigned to a command investigations unit and categorized as misconduct/improper search and discourtesy. In 2011, a sergeant likewise misclassified a complaint alleging that BPD officers had been harassing an African-American woman's nephew over the past month by repeatedly stopping him near their home in West Baltimore. Though the woman wished to make a complaint of harassment, the sergeant categorized the complaint as a supervisor complaint and closed the case without conducting any interviews of the involved officer or the woman's nephew. This is troubling, particularly given our findings that BPD officers engage in unlawful stops and discriminatory policing. Second, even when complaints are nominally accepted, BPD supervisors often administratively close them with minimal investigation. Indeed, BPD supervisors administratively closed 33% of all allegations received from 2010 through 2015, ensuring that the allegations would result in no further investigation or officer discipline. Administrative closures frequently occur after supervisors make only minimal efforts to contact the complainant. Some of the files we reviewed contain no indication that investigators attempt to contact complainants at all. Many other files showed that investigations languished for months before investigators made any effort to reach out, or that investigators closed cases after complainants failed to respond to a single letter, answer a phone call, or appear for a scheduled interview. By administratively closing complaints, BPD investigators evade BPD's policy that requires all complaints to be labeled as sustained, not sustained, exonerated, or unfounded. Some BPD officers we interviewed believed it was appropriate to administratively close a complaint when the complainant withdrew his or her complaint or could otherwise not be reached. Others believe complaints that fail to allege a real violation of BPD policy should be administratively closed. These administrative closures, combined with BPD's failure to ensure that complaints are appropriately classified undermine BPD's system of accountability and contributes to the perception shared by officers and community members alike that discipline is inconsistent and arbitrary.